A light drizzle fell on the moss-covered tiled roofs of the small road on the outskirts of Dalat. The chilly air seeped through the cracks of the car windows, making Lan pull her coat collar higher as she gazed out at the pine-covered hills shrouded in mist. Hung drove while glancing at his wife, his voice carrying a mix of excitement and concern. "Feeling tired yet? We're almost at the new house, just a little longer." Lan nodded softly, her arms still cradling little Truc, who was sound asleep in the back seat. The girl's head rested on her mother's arm, her black hair falling over her small face. Lan gently brushed her daughter's hair aside and murmured, almost to herself, "I hope the new place is peaceful, not as noisy as Saigon." Hung gave a faint smile but didn't reply. He hoped for the same. His job as a construction engineer in the city was stressful, and the cramped, bustling life made him long for a quieter place where his family could breathe. A friend had introduced him to a 2-story wooden house on the outskirts of Dalat, about a 15-minute drive from the center, with a surprisingly low rent. The owner had said it was too quiet for most people to handle. Hung hadn't thought much about it, only that it suited exactly what he wanted. As the car turned onto the slope leading up to their new home, Lan was struck by the view. Tall old pine trees lined both sides, the wind whispering through their branches. The wooden house emerged from the thick white mist, its red tiled roof standing out amid a wildflower garden. Hung stopped the car, stepped out first, took a deep breath, then turned back with a smile. "Come take a look, cool air. Lots of space." Lan opened the door and carried Truc out. The little girl rubbed her eyes, looked up at the house, and mumbled, "Is this our house, Daddy?" Hung patted her head with a smile. "Yeah, we'll be living here from now on. Do you like it?" Truc nodded slightly, but her gaze lingered unusually long on the upstairs balcony, where a window swayed gently even though the wind wasn't strong. Lan noticed her daughter pressing closer to her side but assumed it was because of the cold. Inside, the air carried the faint scent of old wood mixed with a bit of dampness. The furniture was simple, mostly made of pine, and the floor creaked underfoot. As Lan walked around, she spoke to Hung. "It's decent. Just needs a bit of cleaning and it'll be fine. But it feels a bit cold." "That's Dalat for you," Hung replied, rummaging through a box. "I'll light the fireplace tonight. The 3 of us will be cozy, like in those Western movies." While her parents unpacked, Truc wandered around the house and disappeared for a while. When Lan went looking, she found her daughter sitting in the attic corner, holding an old rag doll. The doll wore a white dress, its brown curls tangled, and its glassy eyes clouded over. Lan frowned and walked closer. "Truc, where did you get that?" The girl pointed to a wooden cabinet against the wall. "It was in there. It said it wants to play with me." A chill ran down Lan's spine. "Who said that?" "The doll," the girl answered firmly, hugging it tighter. Lan forced a reassuring smile. "You must be imagining things. Let mommy clean it, it's dusty." But when she touched the doll, she noticed it was unusually cold, as if it had just come out of a freezer. That night, as the family gathered around the fireplace, Truc insisted on keeping the doll beside her. Hung only chuckled. "She's a girl, liking dolls is normal." Lan said nothing, but her eyes kept drifting to her daughter. When Truc finally fell asleep, Lan quietly approached to remove the doll, but an odd feeling made her stop. For a split second, she could have sworn the glassy eyes had just shifted to look at her. Outside, the wind blew through the pines, carrying a sound eerily like the soft laughter of a child. The first 2 days in the new house passed quietly. Hung stayed busy unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and fixing a few minor repairs. Lan spent most of her time cleaning, hanging new curtains, and changing the bed sheets. Truc wandered around the house, but almost always carried the rag doll with her. Lan had tried several times to hide it, but whenever the doll went missing, her daughter would cry uncontrollably, saying in a chilling tone, "Give her back to me. She doesn't like being left alone." The words sent a shiver down Lan's spine, but she told herself it was probably just a child's imagination from watching too many cartoons. On the 3rd night, Lan woke with a start to the sound of footsteps in the attic. They were slow, steady, and lasted for a few minutes before stopping abruptly. She turned to see Hung still sleeping soundly. His breathing even, not wanting to wake him. She closed her eyes and tried to go back to sleep, but couldn't shake the feeling that someone was standing in the corner of the room, watching her. The next morning, Lan asked Hung, "Did you hear anything upstairs last night? It sounded like someone walking around." Hung frowned. "No, it was probably the wind. Or maybe a stray cat. It's quiet out here. Wild cats and squirrels often climb on the roof." Lan nodded, letting it go, but her unease lingered. That afternoon, while she was hanging laundry in the yard, Truc came running over excitedly. "Mom, she showed me her room." "Whose room?" Lan asked, her hand freezing midair. "The doll's room. There's a tiny room in the attic. And she said I can sleep there with her tonight." Lan froze. The attic, as she remembered, only had a few old boxes and a wooden cabinet. There was no room. She quickly took her daughter inside and climbed up to check. Just as she thought, the attic was only about 6 square meters, with a low ceiling and a single small window. But as she stepped inside, she stopped cold. In the middle of the wooden floor, someone had placed a small rocking chair neatly, and sitting in it was the rag doll. Head slightly bowed, messy hair covering part of its face. Lan's hands trembled as she picked it up, brought it back to Truc, and pressed her. "Who brought it up there?" "It went up by itself. Mommy, last night it told me to sleep there. But I was scared, so today it took me to see." Truc spoke as casually as if she were talking about a neighborhood friend. Lan was about to say more when Hung called them down for dinner. She kept silent but resolved to lock the attic door that night. Around 2 a.m., Lan was awakened by a slow, rhythmic creaking sound. She realized it was coming from the rocking chair, but she had locked that chair away in the attic. She turned over to wake Hung, but at that moment, a long, raspy whisper came from the corner of the room, the voice strained as if from a throat being choked. "Give her back?" Lan shot upright and switched on the bedside lamp. The room was empty, Hung still sleeping deeply. She glanced at her daughter's bed. Truc lay with her back to her, clutching the doll tightly. But what made Lan's blood run cold was that the doll's glassy eyes were no longer staring blankly at the ceiling. They were fixed directly on her, glinting in the reflection of the nightlight. The next morning, Lan woke with a heavy feeling. She had tossed and turned all night, the whisper, "Give her back," echoing in her mind. She tried to convince herself it was only a dream, but the moment she stepped out of her bedroom, she froze. The attic door, which she had locked with a large padlock, now stood wide open. The lock lay on the floor. Taking a deep breath, she climbed a few steps to peer inside. The rocking chair was empty. The doll was still in Truc's room, but, on the wooden floor right beside where the chair had been, there were long, jagged scratches, like fingernail marks dug hard into the wood. A shiver ran through Lan. She quickly turned to go back down, only to find Truc standing at the foot of the stairs, doll in hand, staring at her. "Mom, she said you're not allowed to lock her room anymore." The girl's voice was light, but her eyes were strangely hollow. Lan swallowed hard, about to respond, when Hung walked in from the garden carrying a few planks of wood. He smiled. "What are you doing up there so early?" "Let me fix that. Probably just the wind that broke the lock." Lan thought about telling him what had happened the night before, but remembering his dismissive attitude in the past, she stayed silent. At noon, while Lan was cooking, Truc sat at the table coloring and talking to herself. Lan listened closely, catching fragmented phrases. I know, I won't tell Mommy. Yeah, tonight, I'll open the door." Lan walked over and asked, "Who are you talking to?" Truc looked up and smiled. "With her. She said she'll show me a new game tonight." A chill spread down Lan's spine. That night, Hung went to bed early after drinking with a neighbor. Lan lay beside him, unable to sleep. Around 1 a.m., she heard the sound of soft footsteps, followed by the familiar creak. She quietly got up and followed the noise up to the attic. The door was ajar. Inside, the dim light from the small window spilled over the sight of Truc sitting in the rocking chair, the doll resting on her lap. The girl swayed back and forth in time with the chair, whispering something. Lan stepped in and grabbed her daughter's hand. Truc, what are you doing here? Truc turned around, but her face no longer looked like that of a child. Her smile curled unnaturally, her eyes wide and pitch black, and the voice that came out wasn't her daughter's, it was a deep, raspy voice, like that of an adult. She said, "Mommy will play with us too." Lan's heart jolted. She scooped up her daughter and ran downstairs. But once in the bedroom, she realized 3 long scratches had appeared on her arm, oozing blood and burning hot. She looked at her daughter, now sound asleep in bed, as if she had never left the room. The doll lay at the foot of the bed, head tilted slightly, and this time, its lips seemed to curl into the faintest smile. For the next 3 days, Lan hardly dared to let Truc play alone. Strangely, the little girl didn't seem bothered at all. She still laughed, still clung to the doll as if it were part of her body. Though every now and then, her gaze would drift somewhere far away, like she was listening to someone whispering. That evening, while Hung was fixing a cabinet in the living room, Lan was washing dishes when she heard a soft knocking from the attic. Tap, 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 a steady rhythm, as if someone were tapping a finger on wood. She dried her hands and looked up toward the ceiling. The knocking came again, this time quicker, more urgent. Her voice trembled as she called out to her husband. "Hung, did you hear that?" Hung looked up, frowning. "No, you must have imagined it. Probably a mouse." Lan bit her lip but decided to check anyway. As soon as her foot landed on the last step of the attic stairs, the knocking stopped. The silence was suffocating. She shone her flashlight inside. Everything seemed the same, except the rocking chair was slightly turned, now facing the doorway. A chill prickled her skin. She shut the door and locked it tight. But at exactly 2 a.m., the knocking returned. This time, it didn't come from the attic, it came from the bedroom door. 3 slow knocks. Tap, tap, tap. Lan's eyes flew open. She gripped her husband's arm tightly. "Honey, do you hear that?" Half asleep and irritated, Hung muttered. "Who'd be knocking at this hour? Probably just the wind." The knocking came again, louder now, and this time accompanied by the sound of a child giggling. Lan switched on the light. The door was still shut, but under the gap at the bottom, she saw what looked like the shadow of a tiny hand scratching lightly at the tile floor. Shaking, she crept toward the door and cracked it open. The hallway was empty, except for the doll, sitting neatly on the floor, facing into the room, its glass eyes catching the sickly yellow light. Lan picked up the doll and immediately carried it to the kitchen, placing it right by the back door. But the next morning, it was back, lying neatly on Truc's bed, as if it had never been moved. That afternoon, Lan told the story to Mrs. Tu, an elderly neighbor who lived a few houses down. After listening, the old woman stayed quiet for a while before speaking softly. "Lan, I'll tell you this for your own good, don't let that little girl play with that thing anymore. Toys are like people, some come into our hands as a blessing, some as a curse. And that doll, well, it doesn't feel right to me." Lan nodded, but her heart was in turmoil. The next night, when the clock struck midnight, the knocking started again, but this time, it wasn't from the bedroom door, it was from inside the wardrobe. Tap, 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 like someone trapped inside, begging to be let out. Lan edged closer, her hands trembling as she pulled the door open. Inside was pitch black, only clothes hanging, but in the corner sat the doll, its face now cracked with a thin line running from the corner of its mouth up to its cheekbone. Lan staggered back, then heard Truc's voice right behind her, yet it was strange. Layered, as if 2 voices were speaking at once. She says, "Tomorrow night, Mommy should open the window, so she can come in completely." Lan couldn't sleep the entire night. Truc's words kept echoing in her mind like a haunting suggestion. The next morning, she decided to keep Truc home from kindergarten. She wanted to see if her daughter would say anything more. While Lan was preparing lunch, Truc sat at the table, the doll placed directly across from her, her tiny hands clasped together. She tilted her head, whispering into empty space. "Okay, I'll tell Mommy, but you have to promise you'll play with me forever." Lan pretended not to hear, but her heart pounded. When she approached, Truc looked up, her eyes clear. But her voice seemed to echo from far away. "Mommy, tonight. Open the window for her. Okay? She says, it's really cold out there." Lan tightened her grip on the spoon. "Truc, who are you talking to?" The girl smiled and pointed at the doll. Her. When Hung came home from work, Lan told him what had happened. He sighed, insisting it was just a child's imagination. But Lan didn't believe him. She remembered clearly. The voice she heard last night was not her daughter's. That evening, Lan locked every window in the house. She put the doll in the kitchen cabinet and secured it with a heavy padlock. The sense of relief lasted only until midnight. When the clock struck 12, the knocking came again. Tap, 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 this time from Truc's bedroom window. Lan jumped out of bed and ran to it. The curtains swayed slightly, as if someone had just brushed against them. She pulled them aside. The window was still locked. But on the glass, condensation had formed into the distinct shape of a small child's hand. 5 fingers clearly visible, and just beyond, blurred in the darkness, was the figure of a long-haired girl. Her head tilted at an unnatural angle. Her eyes, pure white, pressed right up against the glass. Lan's breath caught in her throat. She stepped back as the sound of a child's giggle came from inside the room, right from Truc's bed. She turned. Her daughter was still sound asleep, but clutching the doll tightly in her arms. Panicked, Lan ran to the kitchen cabinet. The padlock had been snapped open. The doors flung wide. That entire night, the knocking and laughter circled the house, lingering until the first light of dawn. In the morning, Hung decided to burn the doll. But the moment he touched it, Truc lunged forward, screaming, "No, she'll be mad," she said. "If you do that, she'll stay with me, forever." Hung froze, because that voice wasn't his daughter's. The next morning, Lan decided to take the doll to an antique shop in downtown Dalat for answers. The shop owner, an elderly man in his 70s, had sharp eyes but looked wary the moment he saw the item. He glanced at the doll for less than 10 seconds before shaking his head slightly. "You should get this thing out of your house immediately. It's not meant for children to play with." Lan swallowed hard. "Why, sir? Is something wrong with it?" The old man didn't answer right away. Instead, he rummaged through a drawer and pulled out a yellowed photograph. In the picture was a little girl, about 8 years old, sitting on a wooden chair, holding the exact same doll. Speaking slowly, he said, "The girl in the photo was named Yen, the only daughter of a wealthy family in Da Nang in the 1980s. One night, the entire family was murdered. Only little Yen's body was found in her bedroom. People said, her face looked like she was smiling." Goosebumps spread over Lan's skin. "And the doll?" The old man narrowed his eyes. "On the day of the funeral, this doll disappeared. Months later, whoever ended up with it often met with misfortune, sudden, unexplained deaths. Some say, there's something inside it that refuses to leave its owner." Lan tried to ask more, but he waved his hand dismissively. "My advice, don't dig any deeper. Some things, the less you know, the safer you are." When Lan got home, the story still echoed in her mind. She opened the wardrobe to hang up her coat, and froze. On the shelf was a small, old photograph. The paper had aged and turned yellow. It showed her family on the day they moved in. But in the right corner, standing just behind Truc, was an unfamiliar little girl with long hair covering half her face. Wearing a white dress, holding the doll. Lan's hands shook as she showed the photo to Hung. He tried to reassure her. Maybe it's someone's prank. But at that moment, the sound of small footsteps came from upstairs, even though Truc was sitting right beside them. Lan and Hung exchanged glances. He said quietly, "There's no one up there." The footsteps stopped. Then, from the direction of the stairs, a strange little girl's voice called down, steady and clear, "Mommy, come play with me." Lan clutched Truc tightly, her heart pounding. Hung stepped toward the staircase, climbing one step at a time. The light from the bulb cast shadows over the 13th step. When he reached the landing, an icy small hand reached out and pulled him into the darkness. Hung yanked his arm back on instinct, stumbling a few steps away. He flicked the hallway light switch, but the bulb only flickered once before going out. The staircase was swallowed in darkness. From downstairs, Lan called up, her voice trembling. "Hung, what's going on?" Trying to steady his voice, he answered, Nothing. Probably the breaker." But he knew the power in the house was still on. The living room and kitchen lights were fine. Only the upstairs hallway and staircase were drowned in shadow. From above, the sound of small footsteps began again. This time, not hurried, but slow and deliberate, as if drawing it out. Clack, clack, echoed in the narrow space. Lan clutched Truc tighter. The little girl whispered, frightened, "Mom, she's here again?" Lan stiffened. "Who's here?" Truc's wide, clear eyes glistened with fear. "The long-haired friend, the one who plays with the doll." Hung climbed 2 more steps. Gripping the railing tightly, he strained his eyes into the darkness. But it was thick and impenetrable. A wave of cold air drifted down from above. Suddenly, from that darkness, a whisper hissed right next to his ear. "Give her back?" Hung stumbled back several steps. Gasping, he almost bolted down the stairs. Slamming the living room door behind him, Lan stared at him, pale-faced. What did you see?" Shaking his head, sweat breaking out, he said, "It wasn't human." At that moment, every light in the house went out. Darkness swallowed them whole, leaving only the sound of their quickened breathing. Outside the window, a child's soft giggle drifted closer and closer. Truc buried her face in her hands, sobbing, "Mom, she's in the house now." Lan gripped her daughter's shoulders. "Who's in the house, Truc?" Through her sobs, the girl answered, "The doll." The moment the words left her mouth, a sharp click echoed from the front door, as if someone had just unlocked it from the outside. The sound jolted all 3 of them. Hung moved quickly to the door, pressing his ear against it. No footsteps outside, no wind, but the lock had clearly been turned. Lan, clutching Truc, asked shakily, "Hung, could someone be coming in?" Eyes fixed on the door, he whispered, "No, I don't hear anyone." He took a deep breath, gripped the handle, and yanked it open. The front yard lay in complete darkness, only faintly lit by the pale moon. No one was there, but in the middle of the yard, something lay on the tiles. Hung stepped forward, bending down. It was the doll. From inside, Lan's voice wavered with fear. "My God, why is it out there?" Hung picked it up. The doll's body was ice cold, as if it had been submerged in freezing water. Its glass eyes were wide open, reflecting the moonlight, staring straight at him. A faint sound came from behind. Hung turned, just in time to see the front door slowly closing by itself. "Lan," he shouted. He rushed inside, but the moment he crossed the threshold, the entire room changed. The living room dimmed to a murky haze. Furniture warped and twisted as if seen through thick, distorted glass. Lan and Truc were gone. In their place sat a row of dolls neatly arranged on the sofa, all facing Hung. Among them, a long-haired girl sat still, clutching a doll identical to the one in Hung's hands. She slowly lifted her head, her smile creeping wider. "Give her back, and I'll let you go." The laughter of dozens of children's voices filled the room, making Hung back away, his eyes darting for an escape. "Lan, Truc, where are you?" he shouted. No answer. Only the tiny mouths of the dolls moving in unison. Here, from the ceiling, a pale, lifeless hand dangled down and gently touched Hung's shoulder. The icy hand touched his shoulder, and Hung spun around in shock. A deathly white face, eyes sunken deep and lips torn open to the ears, stared at him from the darkness behind. Lan and Truc were nowhere to be seen. The room seemed to have been drained of all light, leaving only faint shapes of tiny figures moving slowly. Click, click, the sound of doll joints shifting echoed through the air. The little girl's voice came again, right beside his ear, though no one was there. "Daddy, stay and play with me." A sudden force yanked him to the ground. The doll in his hands tumbled away, spinning before stopping, its face turned directly toward him. The glass eyes now glowed a fiery red, like burning coals. Hung tried to get up, but his whole body felt pinned down by hundreds of invisible hands. Cold, tiny fingers gripped his wrists and ankles. He felt himself being pulled downward, but not onto the floor. It was into something dark, bottomless, like a black pit. Suddenly, Lan appeared at the far end of the room, clutching Truc tightly in her arms, screaming, "Hung, don't let it take you. Grab my hand." He reached out, but the space between them stretched unnaturally, as if the air itself had been bent. Truc's voice came faintly. "Daddy, I'm scared." The sound of children's giggles grew closer. Out of nowhere, a doll hurled itself at his chest, clinging to him. Its mouth opened, not plastic, but rows of razor-sharp human teeth. Hung screamed in agony as it bit deep into his skin, draining the warmth from his body. The room spun wildly, everything blurring into a solid black vortex. The last thing he heard was a voice echoing in every corner. "Now, the whole family will be together, forever." He jolted awake. His body was lying in the middle of the living room, cold sweat soaking his shirt. Lan and Truc sat in the corner, staring wide-eyed without blinking. He staggered toward Lan, but the moment his hand touched her, her flesh softened like wet clay, collapsing into an empty skin that slid to the floor. From inside, dozens of tiny dolls crawled out, climbing up his arms and wrapping around his neck. Children's voices rang from every direction in unison. "This is our home now. Mommy and Daddy will never leave." The front door slammed shut, the lock twisting on its own, chains tightening. The windows were clawed from the outside by dozens of tiny hands, their fingers stretching unnaturally long, curling around the frames. Truc slowly stood up, but her face had twisted beyond recognition. Her eyes were empty black pits, her mouth torn wide to the ears. Her voice was a mix of a child's tone and a grotesque hiss. "Daddy, let's play a new game." Before he could react, Hung was yanked backward into the bedroom. The room began to shrink, the four walls pulsing like they were breathing, closing in. From the walls, hundreds of warped child faces bulged out, grinning grotesquely. In the chaos, a cold whisper brushed his ear. "This house once belonged to me, now it belongs to you." The darkness in the room wasn't like normal darkness, it was thick, tangible, like touching a sheet of icy velvet. Doll footsteps pattered around him, sometimes far, sometimes close, mingling with half-strangled giggles. Hung groped for the light switch, but each time his fingers touched the wall, his skin burned with a freezing sting. A tiny hand, impossibly strong, clamped onto his wrist. He jerked hard, but it clung like a steel hook. A voice breathed against his cheek. "Stay, forever?" A sudden light flared, but it wasn't electric light. It was a pale, sickly glow radiating from dozens of dolls standing in a circle around him. Their eyes all snapped wide open, pupils spinning wildly, mouths silently moving. In the center stood Lan and Truc, but Hung knew instantly, they weren't really them. Lan stood still, eyes empty, the corners of her mouth curled faintly. Truc cradled the doll in her arms, softly singing a lullaby, but the melody was warped. High notes hissing, low notes groaning. Hung tried to step forward, but the floor beneath him turned soft like mud. Every step sank deep, the cold seeping into his bones. From the muck below, countless small hands pushed up, grabbing his legs, dragging him down. Lan's mouth opened, but the voice was that of an old, rasping woman. "You think you can take them away? They've been mine since the moment this doll entered your home." Truc lifted her head, her eyes glowing red, a smile splitting her cheeks. "Daddy, it's warm down here." Then both of them sank into the black sludge. The dolls all tilted their heads in unison, as if inviting him to follow. The floor opened into a gaping pit with no end in sight. A freezing wind rushed up from the depths, carrying screams, laughter, and the faint, haunting sound of a lullaby echoing from far below. Hung was falling. The sensation stretched on endlessly. Cold wind cutting at his face, his ears ringing. In the darkness, he could still hear Truc's laughter, sometimes far, sometimes close, like she was playing hide and seek. Suddenly, he hit the ground, but there was no pain. The surface was soft, damp, and breathing. Beneath him was a mass of wrinkled children's faces. eyes wide open without blinking. They all opened their mouths at once, releasing a warped lullaby. "Hush, stay here." Hung scrambled to his feet. But with each step, the ground clung to his legs like a living swamp. Annabelle stood before him, unmoving, her lifeless eyes pulling him in like a deep whirlpool. Behind her stood Lan and Truc. This time, they smiled warmly. Lan held out her hand, her voice gentle. "Hung, let's go home." Truc beamed innocently, holding the doll out to him. "Daddy, carry me." Hung hesitated for a moment, then rushed forward, embracing them. In that instant, all three of their bodies dissolved into a thick black mist, melting into the heavy air. Annabelle still stood there, now cradling a new doll, the face of a little girl identical to Truc, her wide eyes vacant and soulless. The light went out when Hung opened his eyes. He was sitting on the old sofa in the rental house in Dalat. Lan was bringing him a glass of water, Truc playing with her doll. The piece was so perfect he almost believed it had all been a nightmare. But when Truc turned to smile at him, he noticed her pupils were no longer round, but narrow vertical slits like a cat's. Lan set down the glass, her icy hand resting on his shoulder, her voice soft. "We will be together forever?" Outside, the rain began to fall, and within its patter, Hung could still hear the doll's faint, sinister giggle. HOIN 1968. In a narrow alley roofed with yin-yang tiles stood an old woodworking shop. Inside, Tu Lan, the famed craftsman known for making wooden dolls so lifelike they seemed to breathe, was hunched over, smoothing the grain of a block of wood. The shop's doors were shut tight, the yellow glow of an oil lamp mixing with the scent of pine resin, sawdust, and something faintly acrid. Outside, fine drizzle fell. A woman in a black dye, conical hat tilted low, stepped inside. Her voice was low and raspy. "I want you to make a doll, like no other. Its face must be able to watch, to smile." Tu Lan looked up, frowning. "You mean lifelike? That kind takes a lot of work." The woman placed a black silk pouch on the table. Inside were old silver coins, tarnished but valuable. "Money is no issue. Just do exactly as I say." She handed him a piece of paper. The sketch was of a doll shaped like a young woman, but the eyes were long and slanted, the irises sharp as blades. On the back, crooked lines of old Nam script had been scrawled. A shiver passed through him, but he nodded. "All right. How long?" 7 days, she hissed through her teeth. "And remember, when you carve the eyes, you must drop into them a single drop of blood." Tu Lan gave a strained laugh. "Superstitions? Fine, I'll do it, but you'll have to bring the blood yourself." 7 days later, the doll was complete. Its wooden skin was smooth as porcelain, hair made from black dyed silk threads, dressed in a pristine white gown. As Tu Lan carefully carved the eyes, the woman produced a tiny vial filled with thick, dark red liquid. "Put it in," she whispered. The drop of blood soaked into the wooden iris. Tu Lan suddenly felt as though someone was standing right behind him, breathing softly against his neck. The doll's head tilted ever so slightly, lips pressing into a faint curve, as if smiling. He swallowed hard. "It's done, take it away." The woman carried the doll out into the rain, her silhouette vanishing into the mist. But Tu Lan swore the doll had turned its head to look back at him, with the gaze of a living child. That night, in his workshop, he heard a soft clack-clack from the corner. When he went to check, a fresh piece of paper sat on his workbench, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Thank you for giving me a new home." Tu Lan never saw the woman in the black dye again. But months later, he was found dead inside his locked workshop, face ashen purple. On his worktable, carved deep into the wood, were the words, "This is only the beginning." HOI and train station. Summer 1969. Dusk settled over the station, the platform dotted with dim yellow lights. A thin man in a worn shirt, carrying a heavy wooden chest, hurried toward the freight car. His name was Nam Ka, a trader in antiques who roamed the central provinces collecting strange objects to sell to the wealthy up north. Inside that chest, Nestled among Buddha statues, old ceramics, and antique clocks, was a wooden doll in a white dress, the very same one commissioned by the woman in the blackout dye. Nam Ka didn't care about its origins. He'd bought it for almost nothing from a scrap dealer in Hoin. The only thing he noticed was that the doll felt much heavier than it should have been, as if it had a core of metal. The train whistle blew, and the cars rattled into motion. That night, the freight car swayed to the rhythm of the iron wheels. Nam Ka sat in a small adjoining compartment, trying to doze off. Then, tap tap tap. The sound of fingernails rapping on wood came from inside the chest. He cracked the lid and peered in. The doll lay exactly where he'd placed it, its wooden eyes glinting faintly in the lamplight. He muttered a curse, must be the train shaking, and shut it again. Near midnight, the sound changed, clack clack, but now it had a rhythm, like the footsteps of a child running circles around the freight car. Nam Ka sat up, slid open the compartment door, and shone his oil lamp into the pitch-black corridor. Nothing. When he returned, the chest was wide open. The doll was gone. Panic rising, he swept the light across the freight car. In a shadowed corner, there it was, standing upright, facing him, arms hanging at its sides, head tilted slightly, as if listening. He edged forward to pick it up. Suddenly, it straightened its head, the wooden eyes glistening wet, its gaze locking onto his in a way that made his stomach drop. The oil lamp flickered out. In the darkness, a child's laughter mingled with the scrape of metal claws on wood. When the train staff checked in the morning, they found only an empty chest and Nam Ka slumped in the corner. Eyes rolled back, a small handprint scorched into his forehead like a brand from hot iron. The doll was gone. 2 weeks later, it appeared in an antique shop in Haiphong, displayed in the front glass cabinet. From that moment, strange stories began to drift along Khao Dat Street. Haiphong, autumn 1969. Nyat Tin Antiques stood at the head of Khao Dat Street, beside a small cafe. Its owner, Mr. Kwong, was in his early 50s, tall, quiet, and reserved. He wasn't superstitious, seeing antiques purely as merchandise. Profit measured in gold. One morning, when he unlocked the shop, he found a wooden doll in a white dress sitting at the doorstep, loosely wrapped in coarse cloth. There was no delivery slip, no messenger in sight, used to receiving odd shipments from unknown sources. He didn't think much of it, but when he lifted the doll, a sharp cold shot from his palm up to his shoulder. Dismissing it as poor circulation, he placed it in the front display case, prime position to catch the eyes of passers-by. That evening, as he was closing up, he noticed the doll was no longer in the same position. It was now facing outward, its wooden eyes glaring directly at the street. Convinced someone had moved it as a prank, he adjusted it and locked the cabinet. Night fell. The street outside grew still. Around midnight, from his upstairs quarters, Mr. Kwong heard a faint tap, tap, tap from below, like fingernails on glass. He threw on a coat, took his oil lamp, and went down to check. As he approached the display case, the wavering lamplight revealed the doll was gone. The glass door was ajar. From the back of the shop, between shelves stacked with antiques, came the sound of a child's laughter, clear, sweet, and drawn out just enough to send a chill up the spine. He swung the light in that direction. There it was, standing in the aisle, its small wooden hands raised to chest level, as if cradling something invisible. He stepped closer, intending to pick it up, but when he was within a meter, the oil lamp went out. In the darkness, tiny footsteps scampered past him, then an icy small hand clamped around his neck. By morning, people found Mr. Kwong sitting rigid in a wooden chair, eyes bulging, mouth frozen open as if mid-scream. The doll was back in the glass case, in its original pose, but its white dress was speckled with a few dark red stains. Nyat Tin Antiques closed soon after, its collection scattered to street markets, and the doll was acquired by a dealer who carried it to Hanoi, where it would one day find its way into the home of Hung, Lan, and little Truc. Hanoi, late winter. That day, Hung was away on a work trip, and Lan took little Truc to Dongzon Market to buy a few toys. Truc had always loved dolls, though usually only cheap plastic ones. Lan thought she'd buy her daughter a new doll to replace the old one, whose hair had almost completely fallen out. While browsing the stalls selling second-hand goods, Lan noticed a small vendor's cart with all sorts of odds and ends, pocket watches, carved wooden figures, chipped porcelain, and in the far corner, beneath a dust-coated silver cloth, there was a wooden doll in a white dress. Lan bent down, about to pick it up, when the seller, a thin, wiry woman with deep, shadowed eyes, smiled. "Buying it for your child? This one's rare, made from rosewood." Lan hesitated, "But it looks a bit old." The woman chuckled softly. "Old things have a soul, dear. New things are lifeless." Just then, Truc ran over, eyes sparkling. "Mommy, I want this one." Seeing her daughter so enthralled, Lan bargained for it. In the end, the woman let it go for an unexpectedly low price. As she wrapped it, she leaned close to Lan's ear and whispered almost inaudibly, "Remember, don't keep it near a mirror at night." Lan froze. "What do you mean by that?" But the woman was already busy packing other items and said nothing more. That night, Truc carried the doll to her room, naming it Na. All evening, she whispered to Na, as if talking to a real friend. Lan and Hung found it strange, but figured it was just a child's imagination and laughed it off. Around midnight, Lan woke to the sound of tiny footsteps pattering in the hallway. Thinking Truc was going to the bathroom, she opened the door, but the hallway was empty. Her daughter's bedroom door was ajar. Lan peeked inside and froze. Truc was still fast asleep in bed, while the doll was sitting at her desk, facing the large mirror, its head turned directly toward Lan. She stepped in to carry the doll back to the bed, but the moment her hand touched it, a coldness like submerged ice seeped into her skin, making her jerk back. In the mirror, for just an instant, she saw the doll's face curl into an agonizingly slow smile, its round black eyes glistening as if they had just learned a terrible secret. Lan switched on the light. Everything looked normal again. The doll's face was blank, mouth closed. Steeling herself, she placed it beside Truc and returned to her own room. But all night, she thought she heard the faintest sound of giggling drifting from her daughter's room. 3 days passed since Truc got her new doll. She grew more and more attached to Na, keeping it beside her while eating, sleeping, and playing. At first, Hung found it amusing, but soon he noticed that Truc no longer clung to her parents. Instead, she sat for hours staring at the doll, her lips moving as if listening and responding to someone. One evening, while they were having dinner, Hung added some meat to her bowl. "Have another bite, sweetheart." The little girl pressed her lips together and shook her head. "I don't want it. Na says the meat smells bad." Hung frowned. "Na who?" Truc pointed to the doll sitting in a spare chair beside the table. Lan laughed, but a chill prickled down Hung's spine. That night, Hung was woken by sounds coming from Truc's room. He opened the door and found her sitting cross-legged on the floor in the dark, lit only by the faint glow from the hallway. She was facing the doll, speaking in a low but serious tone. "But, I don't want to. Mommy will be scared." He quickly stepped forward. "Truc, what are you talking about?" She looked up at him with a strange, dazed expression, caught between waking and dreaming. "Daddy, go back to bed. Na doesn't like it when you come in while we're talking." A shiver ran down his spine. He carried her to bed, took the doll out to the living room, and placed it in a cabinet. But around 3 in the morning, there was a faint click. Hung opened his eyes and froze. The doll was sitting in the chair opposite their bed, its tiny wooden hands resting neatly on its lap, head tilted slightly, eyes wide open and fixed directly on him. The next morning, Lan noticed something that made her blood run cold, a small round bruise on Truc's wrist, as if from a tight grip. When she asked about it, Truc replied casually, "Na did it. Na was mad at me." Lan squeezed her daughter's hand, but Truc just burst into laughter, a laugh that didn't sound like a child's at all. 3 days after the doll's midnight appearance, Hung decided to lock it inside a wooden cabinet with an iron latch. He didn't tell Lan to avoid worrying her, only telling Truc, You can't play with Na anymore. Understand? Sitting cross-legged on the bed, eyes downcast, Truc's voice was small but deliberate. If you do that, Na will hate you. Na says she'll take everything back. Hung frowned. Take back what? The girl pressed her lips shut and didn't answer. That evening, Lan was washing dishes when she heard a steady knocking from the living room. Knock, knock, knock. She opened the door, but the hallway outside was pitch dark and empty. When she turned back inside, a chill shot through her. The wooden cabinet where Hung had locked the doll was trembling slightly, rattling with a faint scratching sound from within. Lan approached, heart pounding. Just as she placed her hand on the door, a child's voice whispered right in her ear, thin and piercing. Mommy, let Na out? Na is so cold. Lan screamed and stumbled back. But when Hung rushed in and turned on the light, everything was silent again. The cabinet was shut tight. He tried to reassure her, saying she must have imagined it. But Lan's eyes were wide with unmistakable fear. In the middle of the night, Hung woke to find Lan missing from bed. He stepped into the living room and froze. Lan was sitting on the floor in front of the cabinet, holding the key, her eyes wide and unblinking. When he called to her, she turned slowly, her voice low and distant. Honey, Na says if I open the door, she'll let me see our daughter again. Shouting, Hung snatched the key from her hand. But in that moment, a child's laughter rang out from inside the cabinet, then abruptly stopped. The next morning, Truc was gone. The front door was still locked. The windows shut tight. Only the doll remained, lying in the middle of the living room floor, its tiny wooden hands clutching a long strand of hair, Truc's hair. Lan's screams echoed through the small house. Tangled with choking sobs, Hung gripped her shoulders tightly, holding her in place, speaking urgently. His voice cracked as he shouted, "Calm down. I'll find her. I swear I'll find her." Lan shook her head, her tears soaking into her tangled hair. "You don't understand," she sobbed. "Na told me she wants our child to stay with her. She's never giving Truc back." Hung's fingers tightened around his wife's shoulders as he tried to mask the surge of terror rising inside him. He rushed outside to call the neighbors and alert the police. The whole street erupted into chaos. People split into groups to search, combing through bushes, alleys, and every dark corner, but there was no sign of Truc. What baffled everyone was that the house had only one main door, its lock still intact, and all the windows were bolted from the inside. Yet somehow, the girl had vanished as if dissolved into thin air. That night, Lan sat curled up in the corner of their bed, eyes vacant. Hung brought her a cup of hot milk, his voice hoarse. "You need to eat something. Keep your strength up. We still have to find her." Lan didn't touch the cup. She only whispered, "I can hear her. I can hear Truc calling me from inside the cabinet. She's crying, asking me to open the door and let her out." Hung sprang to his feet and strode into the living room. He stood before the wooden cabinet, his hand trembling as it rested on the padlock. Before he could turn the key, there was a faint knocking from within, steady, deliberate, followed by the familiar voice of a child. "Daddy, I'm cold. I'm scared. Open the door for me." Hung's heart clenched. It was unmistakably Truc's voice. He called for Lan. Together, they stood before the cabinet, listening in silence. The voice came again, this time laced with a high, thin giggle, no longer innocent. Lan's hand trembled toward the lock, but Hung grabbed her wrist. "Don't," he said sharply. "Remember the doll? It's imitating her voice." Lan looked up at him, whispering, What if it really is her? What if she's trapped in there?" Neither of them opened the cabinet that night, but in the morning, it was standing wide open. Inside, there was no Truc, only the doll, sitting dead center, its wooden lips curved in a smirk, and on the floor, her pink bracelet. By the third morning after Truc's disappearance, Hung was nearly spent. His body ached with exhaustion, but his mind spun with endless questions. All police leads had gone cold. Lan, however, was changing. She spent long hours shut in the bedroom, whispering to herself. Sometimes Hung would catch her holding the doll, her eyes cloudy, lips moving as though speaking with someone unseen. He couldn't take it anymore. He thought of Mr. Tin, an old exorcist who lived in a remote mountain village in Quang Nam. Locals said he had once saved an entire village from a mass possession decades ago. Hung drove for over 2 hours to reach his house, a weathered stilt house made of jackfruit wood. The faint scent of incense drifting in the air. Mr. Tin was thin, his hair white as snow, his deep-set eyes seeming to see straight through Hung. "You came because of a child, and a cursed object, correct?" The old man's voice was low and gravelly. Hung froze. How did you know?" "I can feel it," Mr. Tin said, closing his eyes. "Last night, something strange passed by here, the stench of blood and heavy resentment. That thing has already latched onto your family." Hung's hands shook as he recounted everything, from the day they bought the doll to Truc's disappearance. Mr. Tin listened in silence, then asked, "The doll, have its eyes changed color?" "Yes," Hung swallowed. "They were black before, now they're reddish." The old man nodded slowly. "Then there's no doubt, that's not just a spirit, it's a demon bound to the doll's form so it can cling to this world. It wants a living host, and your daughter is already within its grasp." He prepared a cloth bag containing several jars of powder, a few golden talismans, and a string of ebony prayer beads. "Tonight, you and your wife must not stay close to each other. I'll come and perform the ritual to call your daughter's soul back. But if she's already crossed the gate, another will come to claim a life in her place. When that happens, you'll have to choose." Hung gripped his hand tightly. "I'll do anything, just save her." When he returned home, Lan was not in their room. He searched frantically until he heard soft giggling from Truc's bedroom. He stepped inside. Lan was sitting cross-legged on the floor, clutching the doll, and in the mirrored wardrobe behind her, Hung caught a glimpse of Truc. But her face was no longer his daughter's. Her eyes were sunk in black voids, and her mouth stretched to her ears as she smiled at him, an unholy, grotesque grin. That night, the wind howled outside as if warning of an oncoming storm. Hung stood by the window, clutching the string of prayer beads Mr. Tin had given him, his heart burning with anxiety. The sound of a motorbike stopped at the gate. Mr. Tin stepped in, an old cloth bag slung over his shoulder, a jackfruit wood staff carved with strange symbols in his hand. He said nothing at first, only fixed Hung with a stern gaze before asking in a low voice, "Where is it?" Hung pointed toward Truc's room. "Inside, Lan is in there too." The bedroom door swung open. Lan was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the floor, clutching the doll. Her eyes glared directly at Mr. Tin, and the voice that came from her mouth was no longer hers, it was deep, rough, and drawn out, like a sound echoing from the bottom of a well. "Old man, your incense stinks." Without blinking, Mr. Tin pulled a red talisman from his bag and pressed it to Lan's forehead. She screamed, throwing herself backward, the doll tumbling to the side, but its eyes flashed a vivid red. From the corner of the room, Truc appeared, standing silently, her small body shrouded in a dense, black mist. Mr. Tin began chanting, sprinkling white powder on the floor to form a circle. With each line of the incantation, the wind howled louder, and the lights in the room flickered wildly. He motioned to Hung, "Hold your wife down, no matter how much she screams. Don't let go." Hung lunged forward, grabbing Lan. She thrashed violently, shrieking like a wounded animal, her nails raking his skin until it bled. Suddenly, Truc's voice called out, "Daddy, I'm so cold, take me out of here." The sound nearly made Hung loosen his grip, but Mr. Tin shouted, "Don't, that's not her." In an instant, Truc's face twisted, her mouth tearing open to reveal jagged teeth, and from deep in her throat came a chilling, guttural laugh. The doll suddenly rolled into the center of the circle, its small wooden hands twitching as if pulled by invisible strings. Its red eyes blazed, and the white powder began to hiss and smoke. Mr. Tin shouted the final verse of the incantation, hurling a talisman onto the doll. It screamed, the whole room shaking violently. The lights exploded, and darkness swallowed everything. In that darkness, Hung heard the rapid patter of tiny footsteps running circles around him. Then a whisper brushed against his ear. "Daddy, if you don't choose, I'll stay here, forever? The room remained pitch black, the only light a faint glow from the hallway seeping through the door crack. Hung was breathing hard, his back drenched in cold sweat. In his arms, Lan was still struggling, her face so contorted he couldn't bear to look at it. From the thick, suffocating dark, Truc's voice rose again, this time sweeter, more desperate. Daddy, save me, take me away, quickly? Mr. Tin planted his jackfruit wood staff on the floor, striking it 3 times with a dull thud before calling out. It's using her form to sway you. A spirit cannot take a soul unless the parents give it willingly. Hung's mind reeled. He shouted, if I don't give her up, then how do I save her? Where is she? Mr. Tin flung a handful of white salt into the shadows. Something hissed in pain. He answered urgently. Her soul is trapped inside the doll. To free her, something else must take her place. The words stabbed straight into Hung's chest. He understood instantly. Something else meant a life. The doll's laughter rang out, echoing off every wall. Its fiery red eyes flared again in the darkness, in a voice that blended a child's tone with something twisted and ancient. It spoke, Daddy, I'm so scared. Let me borrow your body, so I can live. Lan, still pinned in his arms, suddenly threw her head back, her eyes rolling white. When she spoke, her voice matched the doll's perfectly. One life for another, simple as that. Mr. Tin pulled a small dagger etched with incantations from his bag and thrust it into Hung's hand. His voice was gravelly, urgent. If you want to save her, you must stab the doll at the exact moment I call her name. If you fail, all 3 of you will belong to it. Hung's hands trembled violently as he gripped the dagger. He looked toward the doll. It sat there, small wooden hands folded neatly in its lap, but its blazing eyes followed his every breath. Wind whistled through the doorway, and the hallway light flickered in and out. Mr. Tin's chanting grew faster, each word pounding in Hung's skull. Then, Truc, or the thing wearing her face, materialized right in front of him. She reached out, her tiny hand, cold as ice, touching his cheek. Daddy, I'm so cold. I miss Mommy, please save me. The dagger in his hand felt heavier than stone. On one side was his daughter. On the other, the terrible truth Mr. Tin had just told him. Mr. Tin's voice thundered. Now, Hung roared, charging toward the doll, but at the very instant the dagger's tip was about to pierce it, the doll's red eyes blazed like fire, and the shrill, nightmarish laughter of a child erupted, filling the entire house. The tip of the dagger was only inches from the doll when an invisible force slammed into Hung, throwing him hard against the wall. Pain shot up his spine as blood filled his mouth. The dagger spun across the floor, coming to rest at the feet of Lan. She bent down to pick it up, but this was no longer Lan. Her eyes had turned a milky white, the corners of her mouth curling upward. Thin, bony fingers clamped tightly around the hilt as she began walking toward Hung, each step slow and deliberate. Mr. Tin leapt between them, swinging his jackfruit wood staff in precise arcs while chanting rapidly. Sparks of light burst from the staff's tip, but each time they touched Lan, the light was instantly swallowed into the darkness as if it had never been there. The doll sat motionless, head tilted slightly, wearing a smile as though watching an entertaining performance. Its voice filled the room. The child is sweet, but I prefer an adult body, more space, more strength. Ignoring the pain, Hung crawled toward Lan, but the moment his fingers brushed her arm, an icy current surged up his spine, sucking the warmth from his body. In a flash, visions ripped through his mind, a room splattered with blood, the sound of children sobbing, and the hanging figure of a woman with eyes locked wide open. He recoiled in horror, falling backward. Mr. Tin barked, Hung, the doll is the source. Don't let it distract you. Get the dagger. Gritting his teeth, Hung staggered to his feet and lunged toward the doll. But this time, it didn't sit still. Its tiny wooden arms shot out, stretching unnaturally long, the hook-like fingers wrapping around his throat. It yanked him close, and when his eyes met its gaze, he saw Truc. She stood alone in the darkness, clutching a teddy bear, tears glistening in her eyes. Daddy, save me? Hung's chest tightened. In that instant, he knew 1 second of hesitation would mean losing her forever. With a desperate surge of strength, he tore the claw-like fingers from his neck, rolled across the floor, and snatched up the dagger. Now or never, Mr. Tin roared. Hung shut his eyes, shouted with all his strength, and drove the blade straight into the doll's chest. A piercing scream ripped through the air. The walls shook violently, the hallway lights burst, and the room flooded with a deep, hellish red. Lan collapsed unconscious. Mr. Tin doubled over, clutching his chest as blood seeped from the corner of his mouth. The doll hit the floor, but its eyes remained open. "You think you've won?" An icy hand clamped onto Hung's ankle and yanked. His head struck the ground, and everything went black. He awoke to suffocating darkness, the stench of damp rot and iron filling his lungs. He realized he was in Truc's room, but twisted into something monstrous. The walls were stained with dark, dried streaks, wallpaper peeling in jagged strips. From the ceiling, countless tiny hands gripped and twitched like pale spiders. In the corner, the doll sat, no longer resembling a harmless toy. Its skin had taken on the texture of human flesh, lips parting slightly to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. Sitting on its lap was Truc, motionless, her eyes vacant. "Your child is mine now." The voice didn't just echo in his ears, it clawed into his mind, tearing apart his thoughts. Hung lunged forward, trying to wrench Truc from its grasp, but his limbs felt submerged in thick sludge, every movement agonizing. The doll rose to its full height, eye to eye with him, and its arms stretched outward, wrapping around his neck. "You ruined my ritual, but the price will be higher." In an instant, memories were ripped from him. The day he married Lan, her laughter, the first time he held Truc, all twisted into visions of gore, screams, and dragging chains. Back in the real world, Lan woke to find Hung thrashing violently on the floor, hands clutching his own throat. Mr. Tin, barely conscious, crawled toward him, pressing a talisman to his forehead while chanting. But the paper talisman burst into flames on contact, crumbling into ash. Lan sobbed, cradling her husband, but his breathing stopped. His eyes were wide, sclera stark against black pupils, and his lips curled into a grotesque smile. "Lan, our child, is in a better place now." The voice was not his. Children's laughter erupted from every corner of the house. The windows blew open, wind tearing through, whipping the curtains. Outside in the yard, Lan saw Truc standing still, holding the doll, smiling sweetly. "Mommy, come with me?" Lan sprang forward, but the image dissolved into black smoke, vanishing into the doll. She screamed as blood welled in her eyes. The next morning, the house was silent. Neighbors found the front door wide open, but inside, empty. No Hung, no Lan, no Truc, only an old doll sitting in the middle of the living room floor, head tilted, a faint smile on its lips. From that day on, anyone who stepped inside heard the patter of small feet and the whisper, "Mommy, Daddy, let's keep playing."